Hey guys, just wanted to jump on here really quick. I've had a lot of people reach out to me in terms of how they can support what I'm doing. I am doing this full time now, and if you'd like to contribute, if you like and value the work that I'm doing and like to contribute, on every single episode, I have a title "Support My Work." Underneath it, there's a Venmo, Locals, Cash App, or if you prefer not to use one of those methods, you can mail a check or money order to PO Box 25383, Scottsdale, Arizona 85255 9998. So, again, thank you for all the support. Appreciate it and look forward to more conversations ahead. Dr. Kruse, thank you so much for coming on. And I must say, starting off, your conversation with Danny was outstanding. And for people, obviously, I would tell you to go listen to my podcast with him first, and then go back and listen to Danny's. But the information that you provided, I mean, I've had to go back and re-listen to parts of it, listen to the whole thing several times, and thank you for that. And thank you for coming on here.
No problem.
So you were just saying offline, and I just want to get right into it, how, it's important for you to provide information to people about, what the shadow government is. Because I find the masses, and this is one of my biggest frustrations right now, is people, A, they don't want to listen, they don't want to hear it, and B, they're in denial of really where we're at. And so you were touching on that, so I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, well, I think the whole idea really, for me, like the last 18 months, this whole story that I'm really unleashing to people, I started with the science part of the story with Rick Rubin and Huberman to tell people about POMC. Why? Because it turns out the sun is the single most important thing to staying away from the bioweapons program that the shadow government built. And then there's obviously other parts to it. But what happened after that? Bukele gives a speech in February about CPAC and basically tells the world, doesn't matter who your next president is, because if they don't make the right diagnosis, the patient's not going to get out of the ICU. And this idea, I don't think a lot of people understand, actually started in his basement when I sat down with him almost 2 years ago to tell him the story that I told Danny on the podcast. And his response after our 3-hour meeting that was only supposed to be 30 minutes, now you guys can see why it took so long, was how do we fix it? So obviously there's several different modus operandi about how you would fix something like that. And the first thing that we spent most of the time on was the biologic fix. And the biologic fix requires a constitutional amendment. So he asked me to write that, and I did. Then there's other bigger issues. Remember, El Salvador doesn't have the issue present with Big Pharma and the DOD. They do have an issue with probably their non-disclosure forms for their Pfizer jabs and all that. But they can't solve the problem that the shadow government built in the United States, which is why I think everybody needs to go back and really listen to what he said to the American people. And, we are literally, 19 days away from an election. And I think that speech still, in my opinion, the single most important speech that a politician has ever delivered to any people. And the irony is, here he is, as a small country in Central America, and he's not lecturing Americans. He's just warning us that if this goes the wrong way, we're going to wind up either like El Salvador was 30 years ago or 20 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago. Or I think a better case is we're going to wind up like Venezuela did under Chavez, where they had a spectacular economy, tons of oil, very profitable, and they went boom very quickly. They had their guns taken away, their speech taken away. They had their money taken away. They had things nationalized and people pilfer the resources. That's kind of what is going on in the United States, my opinion, in the last 120 years. And that began with World War I. And I think people are doomed to repeat history if you don't know how the history plays a role. And when I sat down like with Nicole Shanahan and Mary Bowden, who we talked about before, and we did the X spaces, I came this close to dropping some of these ideas there. And I said, I just don't think this is the right place to do it. Why? Because if I do it, people are going to want to know the follow-up, because obviously the follow-up and the details, they're really big and they're important. And I think people need to understand that when you understand the history of the last 120 years, the two world wars and the creation of the industrial military complex, you need to be reminded that the victors write the history books. The victors also can take the history out of the book so that none of the young people today understand what the hell really happened and how the deep state was created. And people like millennials, especially, those are the people who are going to be voting in large blocks in this election. They don't even know about Edward Bernays. They don't know where Bernays' ideas come from. They don't know how they percolated and how propaganda is being used. But the funny thing is, every single millennial right now is afflicted by propaganda, by the shadow government built inside of our government. And largely, that shadow government controls fully the executive and legislative branches. Now, for different reasons, again, tied to history. The executive branch was captured when General Groves had Truman put the NSA, which forced the ONI and OSS to become the CIA in 1947. But a lot of people don't know the details around what that really implied and what things had to be done. Like, how did we get Truman? Well, Truman was the real issue. Groves replaced Henry Wallace, who was the 3-term vice president of FDR, because he knew that FDR was going to die from polio. And all of a sudden, when I mentioned the word polio, realizing that this is 1943, 1944, do the math yourself. That's over 80 years ago. But the story of the polio vaccines contains in it, through this process, the SV40 promoter. And all of a sudden, now we find out 80 some odd years later that the same promoter is in the messenger RNA, which is supposed to be new technology. So even if you're a skeptic, like you said, you've got to ask yourself this question: how in the hell does something like this persist in this supposed new technology over that time frame? And if you don't ask yourself that basic question, I believe you are brain dead, because it's the biggest part of this story. You need to understand truly what their goal is. And this is why we're now in a period where basically COVID was a compliance test for a coming economic reset, because the real last part of the shadow government story is they need to get control of the Supreme Court of the United States. And Kamala has done a great job of telling us how they plan to do that. They're going to take away our First and Second Amendment rights, and then they're going to stack the court. And if they do that, then it doesn't matter. And I think people don't understand how the lawfare really went down. The legislative branch was captured by the Warren Commission. When the shadow government could prove not only they could assassinate a president and get away with it, the people that were left behind in Congress, any of the ones that question it, they were immediately taken to the woodshed. So some of those people that sat on the Warren Commission that did squawk, one of them was Hale Boggs. He was killed. And no, it wasn't an accident. The first person that was taken out, even before this happened, was Bobby Kennedy's dad. Why? Because he was going to run for president in 1968, and they shot him in California because they didn't want him to get close, because they knew that LBJ was a bad hombre, and he was tied to this. But still, to this very day, because of the effect of propaganda, no one realizes how this whole story is really a story of the shadow government, and how it was built and why it's doing what it's doing now. And I just firmly believe, as Bukele tried to teach people in the CPAC discussion he had, if you're not able to make the diagnosis, the patient's going to die in the ICU. And that's where we are now, my friend. So the Danny Jones podcast gave you a big part of the story, over 4 hours of the story. I filled in more details with another guy that I mentioned to you before that if you haven't listened to, I think you should because I get into it. His name is Adrian D'Amico. And why did I talk to him? Because this is important for you to hear. If you understand that the shadow government is tied to the papacy and also tied to the royal family and the bankers that link both of them, then you realize that this kid is from Australia. That means the people in Australia and Canada need to know how this shadow government actually affects them as well. Probably the most shocking thing that I said to Adrian was that how would you like it if I told you that the story of the shadow government also links directly to the story that's going on with money? Like, what's the link? I told you that COVID was I should say, a compliance test for an economic reset. So, what's the economic reset that Uncle Jack's knocking on the door for the last 4 or 5 years, but has never really come out and said it till right now? Actually, is about Bitcoin, and that should make you realize why Bobby and why Trump are in unison on this, why they went to Bitcoin Nashville. Why is this part of the story? Because Bitcoin takes the fuel away from the industrial military complex, takes it away from the shadow government side. And this is the reason why the actors that are speaking up right now in Congress, they're very, very loud. They are trying to do everything they possibly can to destroy this because ultimately, if they have no way to rehypothecate money, they have no way to run forever wars, which is part of what the shadow government's all about. That's why we're in Ukraine. It's why we have NATO. It's why the UN Charter will eventually replace the Constitution with this shadow government once they gain control fully of justice. Because right now, remember the part that they have control of. They own Merrick Garland. And that means that people who are criminal that go and perform crimes, he can protect them from prosecution. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to come up for prosecution later, say through a Supreme Court challenge, but that takes 3 or 4 years. And guess what? The shadow government knows that justice has a time factor. It has a circadian biology to it. And unfortunately, the circadian biology that I like to call ultradian, which means 24 hours, that's supposed to be Merrick Garland. That's exactly what Bobby Kennedy's dad did in his brother's administration. Okay? But today, we don't have that. That's why criminals are walking free. That's why we don't have Epstein's list. That's why nobody wants to talk about the link between peer review and Epstein's friend, Robert Maxwell, and his daughter, Ghislaine. That's why the science is stolen. These people stole everything on purpose. It was part of their plan. And if you don't diagnose the problem, you're apt to make a big mistake. And I think the next mistake, how close we really are, like you said, that people don't understand it. They gained control of the Supreme Court, which is why they hate Trump, because he made it a little bit more difficult for him with his picks. It turns out that Fourth Amendment is a real big one, and he put 2 Fourth Amendment experts on there, and getting a CBDC in, which is really what they want, is almost impossible when you have expert Fourth Amendment people. Because guess what? Not even a captured attorney general can change that kind of stuff. You got to have the Supreme Court to really get the final piece in place, which is to replace the UN Charter with the US Constitution. But make no mistake, the people that are on your TV screens and political ads right now are telling you the truth. They're telling you their intentions. Your problem as a voter, just as Bukele has been warning, is can you make the diagnosis? Do you see where the pieces fit? Just like the Tool song said, I see where the pieces fit because I know where they fell apart. Well, the only way you know they fell apart, my friend, is to listen carefully what I said to Danny and listen what I said to Adrian. Listen to what I said in the last 3-hour lecture that I gave to people on my Patreon about how this problem with the polio jabs actually ends in the story of the CBDC versus Bitcoin. To me, that 10.5-hour discourse on the last 120 years of our history are the single most important things for this election. Nothing else matters. And I know that a lot of people don't understand this, but I'm not interested in a whole bunch of people. I'm interested in waking up the savages out there that fundamentally know something is wrong. They don't know exactly what it is, but I've waited for almost 30 years to talk about this. Why? Because the time is now right. This started with Rick's podcast, all the ones I did with him. Then it went to the Urban Assembly one that I did, which was Bukele sending me to Portugal to tell them what's going on. Then it went for me going to Bitcoin Prague and warning them what was coming. That happened this summer. Then I went to see, Mary Bowden and Nicole, and we did an X Spaces about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Then Danny, then Adrian, now you.
I always thought, and I'm proven to be wrong, that the United States never played the long ball. I thought China always plays the long ball, and they'll wait it out for however long it takes for them to potentially, get control of Taiwan. But now we shift the United States, and going back, into the World War II era and even before, and the origin of DARPA in the 50s, were they thinking long ball, or were they short term?
You got to remember that the real long ball player here, the dominant evil group here is the royal family. The royal family has got a 1,200-year history going all the way back to the Magna Carta. So they're clearly playing the long ball. But remember, the Chinese have a different angle here. You just have to know how China was open. China was opened by Nixon. Everybody who's listened to the things that I've already said, Nixon was a bad actor because he worked on behalf of the industrial military complex under Eisenhower. He's the one where the SV-40 shows up under his nose with the NIH. In fact, he was the front man that started to put all these together. And it turns out Nixon and Dr. Alton Oshner were extremely good friends. And in the beginning, Nixon and Oshner tried to do a good thing. They tried to fix the SV-40 problem. When they realized they couldn't, that's when the guys that General Gross set up outside the government took full advantage of it. They said, we've got a plan, and we're gonna use this bad thing, and we're gonna weaponize it. That's exactly what they did. And the craziest part of the story is they weaponized it in the mid-50s, and now it's showing up in 2024 because of patriots like Kevin McKiernan. And I the thing about this story that stunned me the most, and I guess maybe it's because of my myopia as a doctor, I would think that people who complied and took this jab, they should be madder than fucking hell right now. Why? Because we now know that each jab has 60 billion copies of SV-40 in it. Specifically the Pfizer jab. There's a lot of people that are going to die because of this. We now know because of Kevin's work with tumors that he's done in Europe. People don't even know what he's doing on the back end. He's gone to Europe and biopsied their tumors. He's found that this DNA intercalates into your DNA. So effectively, you're a fucking genetically modified organism. Then we have these two jackasses that have showed up on the scene. And I got to be honest, I'm going to call Bobby out on this. Callie and Cassie Means. They're not fucking who you think they are at all. Okay? They're actors that are part of this plan. Go look at some of my tweets that I put out in the last several days. Go look at the blog that I just released today. It lays the case out who they're working for. Why? It's better to blame food than the jabs for what's really coming. Why? Because that buys them more time to get control of that Supreme Court. You need to know who their father is. He writes a book about transgenderism. Well, how is that anything good for, decentralization? And you need to understand that they're part of the Council on Foreign Relations, their whole family. It's actually on Callie Means' page. You got to start asking yourself questions. These two come from Stanford, linked to DARPA. I mean, how fucking stupid do you have to be to know that these two people show up in the ninth inning of a game screaming the same thing that most people in the paleo community or ancestral health have been screaming about for 20 years, and nobody paid attention to them. And all of a sudden, Tucker Carlson puts them on TV and we're supposed to kiss their ass? Dude, this is part of the fucking psyops that's going on. And people need to wake the fuck up. People like Tucker. They like Joe Rogan. Well, just remember, Callie and Cassie Means are right up there right away. I've already told Nicole, myself, be fucking aware of those two. Absolutely. Because all they're doing is buying the people they work for more time. And no, you don't have more time if you're listening to what I'm saying. There's a reason I put the target on my back. This election is everything. Okay? And I will tell you, there's risks. The risk is, and I'll lay it out for you very clearly. If Kamala wins, the industrial military complex still wins. Why? Because they have a Bunsen burner effect in Kamala and Tim Walz. Both of them have been loaded with the bioweapon. So they're easily taken out. How could we take them out? Pretty simple. Well, just take a look at what happened with Ann Wojcicki. She got taken out at 56 years old. Okay? This is very, very simple. It's a targeted weapon. They know how to tune it and get you out of the picture. What's the real goal? Who's the president that the industrial military complex really wants? My opinion, it's Mike Johnson. That's the reason why I warned people a year and a half ago when all that bullshit was going on with Kevin McCarthy. I said, go read the Constitution and see how the balance of power is. When you clear the deck of both the president and vice president, it's the Speaker of the House that's next. Why did everybody care so much on the Republican side who was going to be the Speaker of the House? Well, it's because I think he's a player for the industrial military complex, just like I feel Callie and Cassie Means are as well. And this doesn't mean that Trump is a guarantee we don't get a problem from the Speaker of the House. In fact, I'm going to tell you, if Trump gets elected and Bobby does come in and starts to, say, be the Attorney General and starts to take things apart, Mike Johnson's going to be there to stop them. And I can promise you, it's going, if you thought his first term was bad, my opinion, and I've told the people that I have told that the first thing I would do when I got in was make sure that Mike Johnson had a plane ticket to Guantanamo Bay. And I would also send quite a few of the people in Congress to Guantanamo Bay. Anybody who is associated with this plan, even if it's marginal, through an email, Guantanamo Bay. Nobody should be able to stay in Washington, D.C. and derail the new presidency or the new administration from their path. Because, again, we come back to what Bukele said. The new president has to make the accurate diagnosis. And I'm going to telling the American people right now, that there's risks no matter who gets in. And we have to decide who's more likely than not to get the story right. And, I want to be very clear on this because I know I'll probably get some criticism from what I'm saying, but having an allegiance to a politician is like thinking you go into a strip bar and thinking the stripper likes you. It's just not the way it should be. And you need to understand that you have to be the critical thinker. You have to be the one that puts this together. And what do I look at my role? There's one thing that, you can say about it. You may hate my guts. You may like what I'm doing. But the bottom line that you can't argue with me, I've been a neurosurgeon for over 30 years. I don't have any lawsuits against me. I've done a really good job in my profession. I'm a good diagnostician. And I'm renting you my brain for all the ideas that I've shared on these podcasts for the last 18 months to tell you, don't trust me, verify what I'm telling you, then understand when you go to the polls, you make the best decision for you. Notice how I'm not telling you who to vote for. I'm just pointing out to you that there's a lot of risk for us. We are so close to not only a revolutionary war, a civil war, maybe even a world war. If the industrial military complex doesn't like how November 5th goes, it won't surprise me in the least if we unleash nuclear weapons through NATO into Russia. Why? Because what better way to fuck up the new president? Let's start a world war. And, these may be things that can't come back from. All the stuff that's going on with the open borders and pissing people off in the United States, people who have brown and black skin know that they're going to be replaced. Well, guess what? That foments a civil war. Is that a good thing for a new president coming in? No. Do you understand what these people are doing? They have so many possible pathways to screw over the next administration. And the people that listen to your podcast, they need to be the ones that realize this. It doesn't really matter who gets in. What really matters is that we get rid of these fuckers that are running this shadow government. That's what really matters. They're more evil than King George was in 1774. And I don't say that lightly. And I mean it literally and figuratively.
Yeah, I saw you repost Josh Wakos, who's actually coming on. He's going to be on here tomorrow in regards to the new addendum in the military that they are now able to attack U.S. civilians.
Right, they can shoot us. I trust me. I remember being in clubhouse rooms talking about a lot of these issues, over the last 2 or 3 years, and guys in the military said, "Well, they'll never shoot at American citizens." Oh, look, it's okay for us to get online and tell people that the Australians are idiots for having a digital ID law, but we have this change right before an election and nobody thinks this is a big deal? I mean, give me a break. How freaking stupid do you have to be? Now, I understand 55% of the electorate is dumbed down by, the MK Ultra program and the Brain Health Initiative. I get that. But I mean, this is blatant. What they're saying right now about, freedom of speech, blatant. They're not even telegraphing it anymore. I mean, you almost have to be brain dead not to see what's going on.
Well, and also, do you follow Michael Yan on Twitter?
I to be honest, with you, probably not.
Okay, so he's a war correspondent, and he's talked about this invasion that's been occurring. He's one of the originals about it, and people don't understand now. Like Springfield, Ohio, for example, that town is gone. 20,000 Haitians, and I mean, I'm from Northeast Ohio. It's only a couple hours from me. It's gone.
Right. Well, I mean, the same thing's going on in Aurora, but you have to realize what eventually is going to happen. If no matter who gets in, they're going to elevate those people, give them citizenship, and then they're going to use them to shoot us. I mean, it's as simple. This is pretty obvious what's going on. But again, I just don't believe that people really understand what's at stake. I think they're watching Netflix, drinking their coffee, and watching Circus Maximus on the NFL. That's the people are more interested in why Deshaun Watson sucks than what's going on, in politics right now, what's going on in money. But guess what? Just like the people of Venezuela found out, elections have consequences. And boy, let me tell you, if this goes the wrong way, I think the consequences could be dramatic. I think people really have no clue what's really on the table right now. And my job, I mean, this should be clear to you since you're a guy that's relatively new to me. You should ask yourself a question. Why would a neurosurgeon who's got a pretty good life in the United States pick up all his tent and move to El Salvador 4 years ago? Maybe because I knew what was coming. Got it? Maybe you should wonder that. Like, what do I have to gain here? I try to tell Danny this, that all these guys that are journalists, they made a cottage industry out of JFK's death. And they made money off it for 50 years. I view those guys like people that sell, pictures of the towers of 9/11 at Ground Zero. Fucking pisses me off. I have nothing in this game with the exception of my kids. I don't want to see my kids have to live in a world that I see happening. My diagnosis is the patient has a GBM, a glioblastoma. You're going to be dead in a year if you don't do something about it. That's what I'm telling you very clearly. That's what I'm worried about. No, this isn't a lymphoma. No, this isn't a leukemia. No, this isn't a cancer that the patient may live for 10 years. This is a cancer that you might just have until January 20th, 2025. That's how dire I believe the situation is.
And you have these institutions that are aiding, getting back to the invasion for a second, they are aiding this all the way in. From the border to local, to state, federal, state, local, all the way in.
But do you understand why? Because that's what Merrick Garland controls. That's how you do it with the executive control. That's what I'm trying to explain to you. Like, for the Supreme Court to come back and challenge all this, you have to have lawyers bring those cases, and there's a pathway there. You don't think the industrial military complex understands how the legal system works? Of course they do. So guess what? They know this is their best chance. This is what the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, Bilderberg, the papacy, they have been waiting for this opportunity to recapture their alloidial title back for 125 years. This is a story about getting back the USA and Russia under royal control, one world government, social globalism. That's what it's about. It's about going back to what medieval Europe was all about. If you don't see it, you're seeing it going on in Canada. You're seeing it in Australia. You're seeing it in Europe. Yet, people are still wanting to go to the NFL games in London, still watching Deshaun Watson steal Haslam's money, still watching hockey games that don't fucking matter, drinking their coffee and watching Netflix because they've been dumbed down by the program that started when Groves, Meyer Lansky, and the industrial military complex began.
Yeah, you talked about Meyer Lansky being part of the Mossad, and then also the blue light, which I was not aware of. And it's so funny. I run every morning, and I see people, kids going to school, zombies on their phones, absolute zombies. Walking out of the store, zombies.
Remember, it's not just blue light too. It's also non-native EMF. When people understand that how that, controls your orbital frontal gyrus. I mean, this is my wheelhouse. When people tell me I don't know what I'm talking about, I'm pretty hard for them to deal with because guess what? I've been working on this science for 20 years. Why? How did I get clued into all this? Well, that meeting I had with Becker right before he died. Becker was canceled by the industrial military complex. So guess what? The reason he was canceled is because they didn't want anybody to know how they were really tuning to control the American populace so that you're ripe for this takeover. That's exactly what's going on. I mean, if you really understood the depth, like these people are not dumbasses. They're the smartest people in the world. They know exactly what they're doing. And it's amazing to me to hear people who I used to think are smart say, well, no, they're not that smart. You got to be fucking kidding me.
Talk to me about the Marshmallow program and how that it was a prerequisite for these tech executives to go through it.
Yeah, well, the main thing, it was started in all the same schools that were tied to the ARPANET, which eventually became the internet. And the real part of the story is you need to understand who Esther Wojcicki was. She was the mother of the three sisters, the Wojcicki sisters. Two of them are well known. Why? Because one was a Google founder and got YouTube. The other one is a 23andMe founder, and the other one's name is Jane. She's basically a philanthropist who's tied to this, but she's linked to another guy who's what I would like to tell you is a Generation MK Ultra Brain Health Initiative psychiatrist. This is a guy named Conrad. And Conrad crossed my paths a long time ago in my work when I knew that he was working on Sergey Brin, Zuckerberg, and Zuckerberg's kids. And I got, information later on when I became more friendly with Nicole that this guy was being used by the industrial military complex to take Echo away from Nicole. And he's a really bad actor. And who is he linked to? That's a long chain, but that chain goes back to Sigmund Freud, his sister Anna Freud, and Edward Bernays. Most people know that Edward Bernays was, the nephew of Sigmund Freud. Bernays was used on the propaganda side with the Nazis the Nazis, remember, are propped up from the royal family and the Rothschilds. And Anna was big in America, post-war America. She was even involved with Marilyn Monroe, JFK, RFK. She was the psychiatrist of all the psychiatrists. And if you remember, there was a mental health law passed in 1946 that required, talk therapy and all that jazz for the guys that would come back with the term that we used to call PTSD. It used to be called shell shocked at that time. Basically, she controlled the development of modern American psychology for almost 30 or 40 years. And who did we get from that? We got guys like Conrad. These are like, how they evolve into different things. You heard Danny talk about Jolly West. Jolly West was one of the people that came out of the Anna Freud tree. Who else was linked to this? Well, the big person that I never got a chance to really go down with Danny, because she's tied to the story of the industrial military complex and the story that happened at the Bolshevik Revolution. Trotsky's granddaughter. That's Nora Volkow. Nora Volkow's an NYU psychiatrist who apparently was given, the year before I went to see Becker, a top seat in Anthony Fauci's NIH. And what does she control? She's the National Institutes on Drug Abuse. Imagine that. She controls all the psychedelics. She's also the first person in 2011 that linked non-native EMF and blue light exposure to elevated blood glucose and insulin. She's the one that originally wrote the paper. She's the granddaughter of Trotsky. Most people don't understand. Like, you asked me a question about 20 minutes ago. Are they really playing the long game? Well, let me ask you a question. How the hell does Nora Volkow, Trotsky's granddaughter, a psychiatrist, when you know the history of Bernays and Anna Freud, how does she wind up second in charge to Fauci? That should make your head boil. And when you realize that we retooled our economy between Trotsky and Nora to an information technology where people are being blue irradiated by non-native EMF. So maybe now you can understand where the marshmallow experiment really came from. They were looking to see all these people that will be running the programs that will be evolution 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, 5.0 from MK Ultra into the Brain Health Initiative. We need to make sure that all these people are controllable. They're susceptible to subliminal messaging. They're susceptible to having the orbital frontal gyrate taken away, so that when Joe Biden creates a mandate, everybody in those corporate partners follows along. That's exactly why the marshmallow experiment really matters. And that's why all of them went through it. And who is the grandmother? Turns out it's the mother of those three Wojcicki sisters. That's Esther. And you don't have to believe me. There's papers out there that show you she's known in Silicon Valley as the grandmother of Silicon Valley. Why? Because all these kids were shuttled into this. But this guy right now, the active component in Silicon Valley, in California, for all these families is this psychiatrist named Conrad. He is an absolute fucking danger. Okay? He's the people that we need to take out. He needs a seat in Guantanamo too. All of these people need to be fundamentally taken apart. This is no different than when I deal with a glioblastoma. I know exactly what has to be done. It doesn't mean that we can get it done. Doesn't mean the patient can comply with all the things I need to have done. But if you want to have your best chance to live longer, you have to do everything right. And if you make a mistake and leave too much of the tumor behind, you're going to die sooner. That's exactly the same story that I'm painting for you right now.
When these things were being implemented back then, was it just easier to suppress from the general public that they could create these?
Of course it was. You know the reason why. I mean, think about it. The CIA was absolutely spectacular. And when you understand how the CIA fundamentally was built from Grove's ideas, he fundamentally weaponized them via the State Department. That's not only did he get the president, but he took the State Department, he took the the Attorney General of the United States. This is the reason why Bobby Kennedy had to be killed. You want to know the truth? Because he was a huge risk. That many of the things that General Groves and General Groves 2.0, 3.0, and 4.0, those are all the people that I mentioned. How shall we say this? Tangentially, because Danny didn't want to go down the path. Like, you've probably heard about the octopus murders. You probably heard about all that story. I mentioned a little bit about Iran-Contra, about the October surprise. All of this stuff came from all the stuff that happened through the generals that took over for Groves in 61 all the way through, 81, 82. Every single Department of Defense head is a member of the Pilgrim Society. Know what the Pilgrim Society is all about. The Pilgrim Society is 100% tied to the royal family. It was designed so that the United States and the royal family would have good relations. Well, it turns out they're all loyalists to the crown. Who are the people back in Grove's time that he relied on to get the Jewish scientists to build the bomb? Allen Dulles, card-carrying member of the Pilgrim Society. So was his brother. How did Dulles and both Dulles brothers play into this? Believe it or not, they actually set up some of the connections of how they laundered money. In the beginning, the first thing they did, you asked me how the CIA got Bauer. The CIA had two wings. Groves made sure they had a tactical wing, that's the shoot 'em up part. Then they have a propaganda wing. Turned out the propaganda wing, what's the first thing they did? They started to plug in to the art world and the tech world. That's exactly what they did, and that's how this began. And they began to launder money, and Meyer Lansky taught them how to do that. And you need to know how Meyer Lansky became really tight with General Groves. I actually told you that story too. That was Dr. Kurt Plotkin. When there was no one to man the docks, and FDR got intel that the Germans were sending U-boats into New York Harbor. Why do we call it the Manhattan Project, my friend? Because it started in Manhattan on the 67th floor of the Empire State Building. And the government didn't have the wherewithal to put any soldiers there. Why? Because we were getting our ass kicked at Midway. The Pacific was in shambles, and we had Eisenhower, Patton, and MacArthur fighting the war in Europe. So what did Groves casually mention to the people that were in charge? The mob controls the docks. If anybody's going to see these guys, it's going to be them. So what do? They made a deal with the devil. And that's when the government sat down with Lansky and said, look, we would like you guys to patrol the docks and capture anybody that you find coming off a U-boat. And Lansky said to him, that's fine. We can do that, but you're going to give me something. And they said, well, what do you want? He said, Lucky Luciano's in a maximum security prison. I want him in a minimum security prison so we can run our business. Remember, they're the shoot 'em up part of the business. Lansky's the accountant and the banker. He's the Rothschilds of the mob. That's what he is. So within 2 months, Lansky spectacularly pays off for the military. He finds 19 guys, kills 18 of them, but he keeps one guy alive, the guy that I talked about in Danny's podcast, Dr. Kurt Plotkin. Why? Plotkin told Lansky something very interesting. He said, this guy tells us that they're using mescaline that they get from Mexico to get the Jews in the gas chamber. And he also told us they're using fluoride to do the same thing to make them more docile. So what does Lansky do? He turns that information over to the U.S. government and his handlers in Israel. Remember, Israel is not formed yet. It's called the Zionist Federation. Who are all those guys? Those are the guys that form the groups B'nai B'rith, who are loyal to the crown. Okay, those are the guys that were involved in killing Lincoln and starting our Civil War in the 1850s. Okay, they eventually become the ADL. They eventually now are AIPAC. Okay, they became the Mossad after 1948 under David Ben-Gurion. That's where this started. That is how the tentacles of the octopus began to grow. And then it morphed. And once Lansky put the money in to this endeavor, he came up with some pretty amazing plans. He used technology, he used art, and he used finance to make General Groves spectacularly successful on the outside of the military. And you have to know, why did Eisenhower get rid of Groves? Because they were furious. The guys that were in the theater thought that Groves was trying to take over the war by dropping 2 bombs that weren't necessary. All the generals knew that the bombs weren't necessary. But because Groves spent 3 years and billions of dollars building this bomb, he basically installed his own president to make sure that it would happen. And that's really who dropped the bomb. It wasn't Truman. In fact, Truman didn't even know the bomb existed until Groves sent Jimmy Burns to his office to tell him that it had. And who do you think Jimmy Groves was in this story? He was a South Carolina senator who was powerful in the DNC that helped Groves get rid of Henry Wallace to put Truman in. Who became the State Department head under Truman? Jimmy Burns. And then what happens in 47? As Eisenhower screaming at Groves, he goes, yeah, I'll get out, no problem. But he leaves a little nuclear weapon in an executive order. That's when I sat down with Becker and he told me, it's something very interesting, Jack. He said, do you know how laws get passed in the United States? And I said, yeah, I think I learned it's, the Congress passes it, the president signs it, it's a bill, then it becomes a law. He goes, yeah, there's another way that it was occurring through the war. Because if you write an executive order and it gets published in the Federal Register within 10 days, effectively it's a law. I said, really? He said, yeah, go look into what happened with the National Security Act that's in the executive order. You'll find out that there's a clerical error. And the ONI and OSS didn't get turned into the CIA until 1948. Because that gave Groves almost a year and a half of time to build the industrial military complex outside the military. Turns out he was right. I went and verified all of that. So what did Groves do when he got on the outside? First thing he does, he goes buys a weapon manufacturer, Remington Rand. Then he merges it with another one called Burroughs. What does he do? Starts buying electronics companies. What is the merger of Remington Rand and Burroughs eventually become? Sperry, the first big tech company ever. And what did they go on to build? 46 UNIVAC computers for who? The U.S. military. Guess what happens in 1957 to blow this whole thing up? The Russians decide not to go the way the Americans went, and they started to build Sputnik, and they went up in space and put something up there. And right away, Eisenhower knew he was hoodwinked. He realized that Groves was onto something outside the government, and he had to bring his mortal enemy back in. That's how ARPA became DARPA, and it went under the Department of Defense control. That happens in 58, the year after. What happens in 59? That's when we get Castro. Starting to see how it all fits together yet, my friends.
And you mentioned as well, with Castro, they were targeting him to assassinate and in tainted cigars. How did that not happen?
Well, it's pretty simple, and it goes to this story. I'm going to throw some things out at you probably remember. You remember the Gary Powers, the pilot that was caught over Russia in the U-2 spy plane? What if I told you that the CIA made sure that they sabotaged the FBI? They used a molecular hydrogen tank to make sure that he couldn't fly at high altitude and he would crash. Why? Because they were trying to get Lee Harvey Oswald in to Russia at that time to make it look like he's a defector so that they could actually bring him back so that he could go to Mexico and then go to Cuba to deliver the cigar. Why? What was going on in 51 through 55? That's the whole story about Bernice Eddy. When she found out that SV40 was in the polio vaccine, that's when they got the ideas. This is a bioweapon, and we're going to use it to put in a cigar. We're going to figure out a way to get a guy that looks like a communist in to deliver the cigar who foils the plot, as I told Danny, Santo Traficante. Why? Because it turns out when the mob lost all their money in Cuba, they found out that running drugs was a way better deal. So Traficante was feeding information to Castro and his handlers in the federal government. Who knew that? Meyer Lansky. Meyer Lansky controlled Traficante. And Lansky became very aware of who the real problem was. Like, he figured out things that not even General Gross found out. When he found out that the royal family, the papacy, the Rothschilds were behind this, Lansky did something amazing from 1959 through 1974. He started deploying money into cryptographic research. How do you like that? Why would he get that idea? Well, he was, remember, he's a money guy. He wasn't anything else. Something very unusual happened in the UK in 1951. The guy that supposedly broke the Enigma codes on the Germans was this guy that was lauded. His name's Alan Turing. What do you know about Alan Turing besides the Enigma codes? He's the guy that comes up with the Turing test. He's the guy that comes up with the idea for the computer, right? You would think that this guy would be celebrated kind of like Jonas Salk, but Jonas Salk wasn't either. Well, Lansky figured out that what Turing was really doing was sending messages to the Germans from the royal family and the Rothschilds. He wasn't breaking any codes. He was at Bletchley Park working for the royal family. And guess what? That meant after the war, he became a liability just like Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby did. So what did they do? They chemically castrated him. Then they poisoned him with an apple that had cyanide in it. Do you know who named their company after that poisoned apple? Steve Jobs. How do you like that? That's where the idea came from. Do you understand how many people are linked to this story? So Lansky realized that what was Turing's real claim to fame? He was a cryptographer. And you want to know something that's very unusual that you probably have never looked into? One of those Uncle Jack, breadcrumbs. Do you know that in the Munitions Act right after World War II, that cryptography is listed as an act of war? Did you know that? Same kind of characteristics as, say, a tank, a nuclear weapon, a Tomahawk missile. So let me ask you a question. Why is mathematics or software in the Munitions Act? Might it be that the United States government knew exactly what was going on after the war? Might it be, so did Meyer Lansky? Might it be that battle lines were redrawn after the war when Meyer Lansky realized really who his friends were and who they weren't? So what did he do? He became the banker for the industrial military complex. And they started laundering money, not only through drugs, but also through artwork and the art world. Why was this a beautiful exposition for Lansky? Well, most people know the nefarious sides of Lansky. They know about his sex rings. They know about the pedophilia and how, he entangled Roy Cohn and McCarthy in some of this. In fact, he's the reason why J. Edgar Hoover gets caught in the flypaper as well. But this, Lansky's idea there was the pre-Jeffrey Epstein issue. That's where it came from. If you think Epstein is a new guy, you're fucking dead wrong. You don't know your history, okay? Meyer Lansky ran this game, and he ran it with all of his guys to get control of these people. But what was Lansky's real key? He actually found out that the Rothschilds were behind most of this. So what did he decide to do? He decided to beat them at their own game. And he had rock star approval from the U.S. military. Why? Because of what I told you with the German U-boats in the United States. The people in ONI and OSS thought this guy, he shit, ice cream. And they played ball with him all through the 50s. Where did it change? When he walked out of the Cuban casino with $3 million, and then J. Edgar Hoover wanted to go after him. So J. Edgar Hoover told Lansky that he was going to take him down just like they took down Capone. All right? Everybody knew that. You remember Sam Giancana, Lucky Luciano, they come from the same crime family in Chicago. So Lansky said, I got you. So that's how he got him entangled into the pedo homosexual ring. There was pictures all over the place that Lansky made sure that he had on these guys. That's where the leverage came from. But Lansky did something even more brilliant. He actually started to use some of the money that he was laundering from drugs, casinos, and the pedophile ring into cryptographic research from 1959 through probably 1974 until he used it because he needed to use it. And it turns out through the 60s, everybody thought that Lansky's effect was diminishing as the industrial military complex grew. How did Lansky come up with a plan to screw the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the Mellons, and the Harrimans that worked, in Brown Harriman, where Prescott Bush ran the show for the Nazis hiding their money? This is the best part of the story for me anyway. Lansky gets the CIA to start buying all these young Jewish artists' work for a couple of $100. These are the guys that become Jackson Pollock, the Roy Lichtensteins. And eventually, all of those things wind up getting hung in Rockefeller and Guggenheim's museums. You know why they could never catch Lansky like they catch Capone? Because Lansky didn't own assets. He owned people. And it turned out the people that he was trying to fuck in the ass, he hung all the artwork right under their noses in their own museums. He laundered the money and didn't tell the government what he was doing with any of it. He had no idea. And where the story comes to real fruition is when Lansky realizes that the people that he helped in the government, meaning now the General Gross 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, those are all the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that were present in LBJ and Nixon's administration. They tried to arrest him on drug trafficking, money laundering, fraud in 1969. And he knows that. His attorney at this time is Ira Malnick. It was actually in the military in the 1953 through 1956 era where he's introduced to most of these people that Lansky had set up. That was the link between Lansky and the U.S. military. It was Ira Malnick. And Ira, to this day, is still alive. He's a practicing attorney who takes care of guys like Santo Trafficante, but this version of them, this time in 2024. And Malnick is very different than Lansky. He actually has assets. He lives in a $60 million house in Florida right now. But when Lansky gets called by the U.S. federal government in 69, he's told he's going to be arrested. So Malnick tells Lansky, the Mossad, because now the Mossad is in, this is after 48, Mossad set up a role just like the United States did with Lee Harvey Oswald. If you're a Jew, no matter if you have any kind of problems with law anywhere else, you're allowed to come back to Israel, get a passport, and you'll get protection. So in other words, you have sanctuary and safe harbor. So Malnick tells Lansky in 69, go to Israel and stay there. You can avoid the subpoena. The U.S. government decides that's not good enough. So they go after him. They talk to their friends in Israel, who they're very chummy with, and the Israeli government brings Lansky in and says, look, they are hell-bent on taking you down. He goes, okay. Then he pulls a play out of a movie that you probably saw when you were a young man called Top Gun. Remember when Tom Kruse is sitting in the plane and he tells the cat behind him, I'm going to let him come closer? And then he pulls his maneuver. Lansky does the same thing with the United States government and the industrial military complex. He says, not only would I tell you how I did this, he goes, I'll even give you the solution. So what does he do? 1969, under the threat of the subpoena, he comes back to the United States. He has his passport from Israel. He has the word of the Mossad that he'll be protected, even if he does go to jail. He tells the United States government that there's a giant gaping hole in the Federal Reserve. And he's been able to exploit it and use it for a really long time. Lays the whole cards out on the table. You know what happens, my friend, in 1970? The Bank Secrecy Act. You know what that's known as? That's called the AML-KYC laws. That's where they come from. The most unconstitutional law ever passed in the United States before the Patriot Act. Guess why that happens? Because Lansky tells the Rockefellers, the Harrimans, the people that own the Fed, I got you by the balls. And he shows them how he has them by the balls and what he's been doing. Then he tells them, you know all those computers that I helped fund General Groves on, those UNIVAC computers that worked with Sperry? He goes, you need to use computers and cryptographic tie-in to make programmable money. What happens magically in 1971? The Nixon shock. He removes gold from the gold standard. Why? Because the federal government understands that paper money is no good. And you have lived most of your adult life during this devaluation because they know what they have to do. So what happens? The guys that own the Fed that aren't part of our government start getting to work on programmable money. Eventually, you know what that turns into. It's called a CBDC. Okay? Now, what does Lansky already know because he's been working on the same process since 1959? That this is not an easy go. There's not a lot of Allen turns around to make this go and work really well. So he knows he has some time. He tells Melnick from 59 all the way through 83 to use all his money appropriately. That some very interesting things happen, especially, I would tell you, probably late 70s, early 80s. And he begins to fund people that start doing the work that gives you the trap door for Meyer Lansky and Murder Inc. In other words, he decides to take over what the Rothschilds did for the industrial military complex. But he's going to do it his way. He's going to have a trap door to the CBDC. And he doesn't tell anybody what he's doing. And he makes sure, because you can imagine the mob was absolutely furious that he was going to turn state's evidence in 69. Magically, what happens in the transition between Nixon and Gerald Ford? Remember, these are two guys that are tied to the Warren Commission, the JFK assassination. Magically, Lansky gets a get out of jail free card, is acquitted. You know what the acquittal paper says? Well, he's an old man. He's likely going to die soon. Turns out he lives 10 more years after 1973. If you go look at the guys that are the attorney generals of the United States and the guys at the head of the State Department, you know what you'll find? All of them are members of the Pilgrim Society. These are the people that wanted to put him away. So Lansky knows who his enemy is right now. Go look up Elliot Richardson. You'll find out that he was only in the government, Nixon's government, for like 7-8 years. Okay? I should say 7-8 months before the Watergate thing happens. And that was also a takeout to get rid of Nixon because Nixon was a problem for the industrial military complex. The guy that takes over is a Warren Commission member. And who is the attorney general for Gerald Ford? You might want to look that up. That's Edward Levy. Edward Levy is a Mossad agent. He has dual passports in Israel and the United States. Go think about that for a minute. You know what Levi does? He actually buries the whole story that I started to tell Danny about NUMEC and about the Apollo affair. He never lets the next president, who's Jimmy Carter in 76, know anything about this because he's protecting his real franchise in Israel. And what does Levy begin to do? Remember I told you that they captured the two branches of government? The first thing that he tells Ford is, I want you to nominate Robert Bork for the Supreme Court. If he fails, then I want you to put John Paul Stevens in. Guess what? Bork got bounced, but who got in? John Paul Stevens. So now you begin to see they are going after the Supreme Court right at this time. So where I took you in the story is right up to probably the juiciest parts, which is where Lansky's idea to use mathematics and cryptography to create a trapdoor. Where does the trapdoor idea come from? Well, that's where I told you before about the octopus murders. You need to look into that, my friend, because you'll find out that in the mid-70s, late 70s, there's a company called Inslaw, and they're run by a guy named Bill Hamilton. And he comes up with a software that's tied to the Department of Justice and the executive branch. It's sold to people like it just follows cases for lawyers. But guess what happens? The industrial military complex puts 2 trap doors in it, and they want to sell it so that they can see what other governments are doing. It's actually a tool of surveillance because it is patched by them. And Lansky knows this is all going on at the same time because they think he's still playing ball with them. That's where the idea of a backdoor for promise comes from. Now, if you go look at the guys that are tied to the octopus murders, you know what you'll be shocked to find? Just to tie this back to Danny, one of those guys is the guy that destroyed all the files for MK Ultra. How do you like that? Another one of those guys, George H. Bush, who was what? For Reagan? Think about it. All these guys are all connected. When I tell you it's the biggest fucking criminal enterprise ever that's been running in our government from 1942 to right now. It used to be outside the government, and now it's inside, intercalated in the government. This is our version of MS-13 at global scale. This is where all the neocons are hiding right in front of you. This is the reason why Mike Pompeo can get away and try to kill Julian Assange and think he can get away with it. Why? What attorney general is going to put him in jail? Got it? You don't believe it? Go look what Muammar Gaddafi said at his only speech. If you don't think Muammar Gaddafi was a good diagnostician, you're a fucking idiot. He gives one speech the whole time he's the head of Libya, and he casually points out that it's pretty obvious that somebody wrote the beginning part of the UN Charter, and the same people didn't write the rules and regulations. Turns out he's right. The preamble was written by FDR. And how did that start? Between Stalin and FDR at Tehran, and then followed up at Yalta. Who wrote the rules and regulations? General Groves. Why? There was no chance that they were turning this over to the common man after the war. They were going to run the country. That's the goal. And the goal was to replace the UN Charter with the U.S. Constitution. Why? Because if you look at the difference between the preamble and the rules and regulations, you'll see that Muammar Gaddafi figured it out. He was dead in a couple of months after he gave that speech. Who did that? Clinton. Who was the Secretary of State? His wife right after that. They took him out. You need to understand where the tentacles are. The tentacles just weren't, what happened with the Indian reservations. When you find out that Meyer Lansky had his hands in utilizing Indian reservations to run casinos and drugs to set up the Iran-Contra affair. Why? Because these Indian reservations, it's called Carbazon in California, they were considered a country in the country of the United States. They only had 24 members. That's how smart Lansky was. And he had all guys that worked for the U.S. military. This would be like General Groves now 5.0. They answered to the George H., George W., the guys that are all linked, the big guys, Penner, Barr, the Bush family, they're all linked. They controlled all of it. And when you find out that the octopus story actually links to the Las Vegas shooter and it brings in the Saudis, you'll be stunned. Khashoggi is one of the people in the octopus murders. Remember, he was just killed not that long ago, a couple of years ago. Well, you'll begin to find out who owned the first top towers of the Mandalay Bay. Turns out it was the families that are tied to this industrial military complex and the royal family of Saudi Arabia. Because guess what? They're part of this program too. They're the ones that helped the Bush family knock down the towers. That's the reason why they were all Saudi pilots who the Mossad trained. You don't know what you don't know. And guess what? 9/11 gave us the second worst law that we ever passed. That's the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act basically opened the door to surveillance. So you asked me a question an hour ago. Why does the military now have carte blanche to shoot us? This has been 24 years coming, my friend, because that's exactly what Cheney and Rumsfeld wanted in the beginning. But you know what? You have to give Americans change and think, while you're giving them Circus Maximus, that they have no fucking idea what's really going on, that they've been invaded since 1942 by their own government. These are the people Thomas Jefferson warned us about. So while you're watching your Cleveland Browns stink up the joint, while you're drinking your stupid coffee or collecting your Beanie Babies or, counting your Ethereum or watching some stupid fucking movie from Hollywood or paying attention to P. Diddy, your country is being stolen from you.
How does, in your opinion, does Israel tie into all of this now? Because if Meyer Lansky was Mossad, and I believe Jack Ruby was Mossad, right? Or Lee Oswald was all part. No, am I wrong on that?
No, you're right. But Meyer Lansky realized that Israel was part of it. So you have to realize there's Jews and then there's Zionist Federation. The Zionist Federation started out, that's the guys I told you about, B'nai B'rith and the Rothschilds. Their whole goal was to make sure that the Jews would have a state in Palestine. So who gave the okay on that? The royal family did. That was George V. There's a letter that's posted on my forum. I've posted on Twitter multiple times. November 2nd, 1917, right in the middle of the Bolshevik Revolution, that the king has granted the opportunity to set up a Jewish state for the Zionist Federation. Remember, this is 1917. I think most people know world history. Israel doesn't get set up to 48. So what's happening between 17 and 48? The Zionist Federation is going to transfer Jews to this area and settle that area and take it over. What's the game plan in Israel? The Pope has a big problem with that because he wants control of Jerusalem. So guess what the Rothschilds figure out? We're going to give you that. So you'll control all the three world religions in this state. The royal family will control the rest and bring it back under a loyal title. What was the real shocker in this whole plan? The Zionist Federation is not, how shall we say, a friend to the Jews. They're the ones that set up the Holocaust. There's a very interesting book written by a Jew that most people don't know about. It's called the Transfer Agreement. This agreement was made between Hitler, Pope Pius XI, and 12th. There's a book out also that's called Hitler's Pope, and it's really about Pope Pius XII. And most Catholics, why do I know about this? Because fortunately, I happen to be Catholic. I grew up that way. I went to a Jesuit college, and I knew that after Vatican II, that the papacy was trying to canonize these two popes. And I'm like, hold on a minute. How can you do anything about that? And there was a play that was done in 1963 called The Deputy by a guy named Rolf Hochholz. And when I was a freshman in college at, I believe, 16 years old, I had to take a religion class. And the first thing that the priest said to me is, you got to come up with a project for the class to discuss religion. I said, oh, great. We're going to talk about the 1963 play in Berlin when the Pope helped set the Nazis up to get Jews to go from Germany to Israel. You should have seen his face. He was stunned. And I said, why don't you know about this? Because all this stuff has been hidden in the papal archives. But I never really talked about any of this until probably the last 6 weeks. Why is that, my friend? You know when the papal archives got opened up? 2020, in the beginning of COVID, when everybody was sidetracked looking at COVID, the papacy opened this up because they wanted to make Pope Pius XII a saint. They basically wanted the architect of the Holocaust to become a saint. Can't make this shit up, bro. And there's pictures of this transfer agreement between Hitler and the popes. The Pope Pius XII started this in 1933 when Pope Pius XI was ongoing. He was the guy who was the architect. Why should this begin to resonate with you a little bit? For some of the things that I mentioned in Danny's podcast. King George boxes in 36. Who takes over as king? Edward VIII. Edward VIII is a card-carrying Nazi. In fact, he goes to see Hitler all the time and admires him. The real reason he abdicates is not because of Wallace Simpson and her 2 divorces. It's because you can't have a fucking Nazi king when you're crafting a plan with your bankers to prop up Hitler to try to get back the United States and Russia by having them on your own side and sabotaging them the whole way through. That's the reason Edward VIII is replaced by his brother.
So in today's world, I mean, you probably saw the interview with Thomas Massey on Tucker Carlson where he was talking about every representative has an AIPAC member. And
right. He's the only one that does it in Congress.
So how does that play into, United States decision to, move forward in the Middle East if this thing escalates? I mean, does Israel have a strong...
Every single person in Congress is compromised. What did I tell you before? I don't think you were listening to me. Guantanamo Bay. Do you understand that the Mossad and the CIA, in my vernacular, are synonyms? They're working for the same people. They're not working for governments. They're working for the one world government. That's the royal family and the papacy and the Rothschild bankers, the Rockefellers, the Brown Harriman people, the Carnegie Mellons. Okay? These are the people that are running this show. That's the leaders of the industrial military complex. And the shadow government that General Kruse gave them is their military arm.
One of the things you said on Danny's show too, which is amazing to me, Doctor, is your retention, your memory. You're not even using any notes or anything as you're talking.
No, why would I use notes? I lived it. If you don't think that I identify as a pissed off American, I mean, I would think that every podcast that you saw me do for the last 18 months, I've been mad as hell. Why? Because maybe some of you are starting to realize I've been carrying this shit around with me for 30 years. I know exactly why my profession was blown up. I know why they canceled Becker. I know why centralized medicine is an absolute sham of the industrial military complex. I know why COVID existed. I knew that we were going to have SV40 in the jabs before anybody else. I just had to have Kevin McKiernan prove me right. And when he proved me right, I've been absolutely nuclear since that. But that's also the reason why I'm not a dumbass. I learned the lesson of what happened to JFK, to Bobby Kennedy Sr., to Robert O. Becker, and to anybody else who speaks out against this shadow government. They either get marginalized, they're quacks, tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists, or if you get really close to the target, you get acute lead toxicity. And why didn't Trump announce, the JFK archives? Because he found out that all the guys that he was friends with in New York, the Bronfmans, the Roy Cohns, all those people, they're the ones that killed fucking JFK. His friends did it. Remember, all the people at Wharton Business School, those are the guys, the guy running Estee Lauder, Ronald Lauder. Let me tell you, bro, that's Rothschild 2024. And it shouldn't shock you because what does Estee Lauder known for? Makeup. What does makeup do? It blocks you from the sun. What is Bill Gates trying to do? Same thing. Isn't it shocking that when you see the whole path, their whole business model, how about the Bronfmans? They run liquor business. How did they get tied into all this? Lansky was a bootlegger in the beginning. Turned out Sam Bronfman was the one that was lifelong friends with Lansky. You want more to it? Peer review medicine is controlled by Robert Maxwell. Go listen to the eulogies that several prime ministers in Israel said about Maxwell. You'll be stunned. And remember, he's got a dual passport too before he was killed between Israel and the UK. They are working in unison, my friend. You need to look, to fix the problem, you have to know your fucking enemy. And you want to know the truth? Most people who are going to vote on November 5th, you have no fucking clue what you don't know. I'm just trying to put some light on the topic for you. I'm hoping that all of you can do your homework really fast because let me tell you something. We got big problems and we got to fix them. And if you want to know the betting odds for Uncle Jack with you guys right now, there's a reason I'm in El Salvador. I understand the difference between a constitutional republic and a democracy. And I look at the United States, the last 75 years, they've turned you in from a constitutional republic to a democracy. Now it's mob rules. You asked me before about Springfield, Ohio. That's exactly why it's happening, bro. Exactly why. That's the reason why what's going on in Aurora, Colorado. Mob rules. Because guess what? Merrick Garland's not going to prosecute any of those people. And it's never going to come to the Supreme Court until they get control of the Supreme Court. And then it's not going to matter.
As you saw people's responses to COVID and how, they just Second Amendment was irrelevant because people just surrendered, right? As long as you let them have their video games, their weed.
Well, that's Plato's allegory of the cave. I mean, that's a story that's thousands of years old. But I don't think that people really understand that's the kind of game that these people are playing. They understand human nature. Remember what I told you. Freud, Bernays, Nora Volkow, what business they in? Studying the psychology of the mind. What was MK Ultra all about? The study of the mind. Now they've weaponized that. Not only did they weaponize the shots, they've weaponized the other part of it. This is just another bioweapon. If you want to know the truth, the COVID vaccine, if you complied, remember the pictures that we saw in the Gulf War when Bush was the president, and we saw the bomb laser guided go right down the elevator shaft? That's exactly what the COVID jab is. When Bobby Kennedy got on in front of Debbie Wasserman in Congress and said that this is a bioweapon that's targeted against certain people, he's exactly right. But go look at what she said and how she tried to jump down his ass. And what did she use as defense? The Holocaust. Now you're going to start to realize how this fucking game has been played. They've been setting this up. And because that's the whole answer. When you take a Zionist Federation Jew, they'll always use the Holocaust as their PR story. But guess what? There's a lot of Jews out there that don't like the Zionist Federation. They really don't like them at all. And those are the guys that are in the Likud party. Those are the guys like Netanyahu. They are fucking criminals. And the same issue. Where are all the Nazis today? They used to be in Argentina. We saved a lot of them in Operation Paperclip after the war. But where are most of them now? They're in Ukraine. You want to hear something crazy? You know all that money we'd send us to Zelensky? He just bought Hitler's touring car, a Mercedes 770, for $15 million at auction in Scottsdale, Arizona. Don't believe me? Look that up too. That's the reason why the Ukraine is filled with all the Nazis that these people created. This is the reason why NATO's a sham. This is the reason why Putin's really right. Putin knows that the United States is captured. Putin's not captured. How does he know that? You got to know your history with Russia. There's 3 Russian guys in that Bolshevik Revolution. What happens? The Zionist Federation kills 60 million Christians in the Bolshevik Revolution. The whole story, the PR story about the Holocaust is created by the Rothschilds and the royal family. They get Hitler propped up in there so that nobody goes back and realizes how bad the murder was on the Christians, because we can't have people knowing that. So who takes care of that? That was easy. That was Goebbels. Goebbels used everything from Bernays' book, Propaganda, written in 21. Dude, this is so orchestrated. It's so brilliant a plan, but you have to understand how the pieces and parts are there. And what are they using? They're using the 5,000-year struggle between Christians, Muslims, and Jews as the PR show to keep us from the real truth. That's the reason why they're using Cali means and Casey means now to talk about food, because they want to keep you away from the real story about light and the jabs, because that's the big issue.
You bring them up, I've had personal friends that have come to me and talked about them. And, and then one of the things that you said in your other interview was the fact that Casey didn't even finish her residency. And I had said prior to that, now I'm somebody, we just met, but I used to weigh 280 pounds. I'm 5'5" and roughly about 153. No surgeries, just work, watching what I eat, holding myself more accountable. And I said when I was hearing about these two, I was like, okay, well, it's no secret. You probably shouldn't eat Pop-Tarts, or you shouldn't eat Twinkies, or, just read what's on the back of the box. If you don't know what that stuff is, you probably shouldn't eat it. So why now is this getting all this attention?
Right. Well, I told you the reason why, because this is propaganda. And this is propaganda to keep you away from the real story. The story, my friend, that you hear me keep delivering. I mean, look, you said you interviewed Mary Bowden. Mary Bowden and I sat next to Nicole Shanahan when we weren't on film. And Mary agreed with me that Callie and Casey are a problem. Why? Not only the story about the residency, but when you realize that they're both tied to Stanford and Harvard, and you realize the story I'm laying out to you, and then you find out that their father wrote a transgender book, you go, hold on. You need to look at this. Why? Because we have people literally that have been talking about the same food issue for 30 years. None of them got placed on Rogan or on Tucker Carlson right away and now have this book to sell. What is this? This is Circus Maximus, dude. And it's Circus Maximus right before. The thing that really bothers me about this is that it fits Bobby Kennedy's mindset. I warned Bobby that it ain't about food, dude. This is a story about light and about vaccines. And he was really good about being on the vaccine trail before these two fucking idiots show up. And my concern, if you look at the hat that I had on when I did the Twitter expose, it was Make America Healthy Again. Well, I got news for you. I don't want Callie and Cassie Means as part of that because I think they're psyops. I think they're part of our problem. And if I turn out to be right about that, if I have any say in it, I'll gladly open the door in Guantanamo and put both of them in there as well. That's how I feel.
Who do you think is the funding behind them then? I mean, wouldn't Tucker know this and Joe Rogan, do you think, before putting them on?
Well, maybe you're making an assumption that they're not part of it either. Because guess what? I had an opportunity to go on Tucker. My nurse, who's sitting right over there, can tell you. And guess what I told him? Go fuck yourself. I'm not interested. Do you know why? I'm not convinced that he's a good guy. I think he's just like them. And if you want to know the truth, I feel the same way about Rogan, but for different issues that I'm probably not going to get into. Because guess what? He was tied to the food guys and the paleo crew. And I don't trust them either because of the story I'm laying out for you. None of these guys. Everybody's want to put a focus on food to get away from the real story. What was the real story? MK Ultra, the Brain Health Initiative, the use of technology. Remember, Google doesn't sell fucking Pop-Tarts. Okay? Neither does Facebook.
Yeah, Michael Yan is somebody that's been very critical of Joe Rogan. I don't know if it's for the same thing for you, but he's been very critical because of the pot smoking and the pushing that propaganda on. And it's definitely made me think differently about him.
The pot smoking is not what gets me about Rogan. Actually, believe it or not, I'll probably stun you even further if I haven't stunned you already. The pot smoking actually is good for the bioweapon. Why? Because of the furin cleavage sites. I mean, again, go back to Kevin McKiernan. What is he doing now? He's a molecular biologist for the cannabis industry. That's what his business is. And it turns out people who smoke tobacco and pot had less COVID during the time they got it. And the reason why is because it goes after the acetylcholine receptor, which is nicotinic. Nicotine is one of the antidotes. And just to show you just how powerful this is, my friend, because I doubt you know this, you can fact check me on this. King Charles, after his mother died, just made a decree that by 2030, that all nicotine products will not be sold anymore in the UK. Why? They know everybody that complied and took the shot actually the use of nicotine actually prevents you from getting sick. So guess what? Nicotine is an antidote. So may marijuana be. In fact, in the blog that I wrote today, I cannibalized some of Kevin's data about the photosynthetic yield of carbon dioxide. You'll be shocked to know that Bill Gates and King Charles, through the World Economic Forum, you know how they always want to block the sun? When you block the sun, it reduces CO2. When it reduces CO2, it makes nicotine and cannabis less effective as an antidote. How do you like that? Bro, they are playing the long game here. They know exactly what the bioweapon was engineered to do. You don't. I'm going to tell you, guys like Kevin, guys like me, we're just finding out. what this thing is capable of. What did we find out literally this week? We found out there's 55 other atoms in the COVID vaccine. Well, we know the story about atoms. How can I tell you this? 2011, a big story came up about Gardasil, the Gardasil vaccine, and that we knew that there was DNA plasmids in that vaccine. This is the reason why I would never let my kids take it. And at the time, I was married to a pediatrician who was fucking batshit crazy, pushing this to kids. I'm like, hold on a minute. You can't do this. There's DNA plasmids in this. And I showed her a paper written by a Oriental guy named Dr. Lee, where the reason they were putting aluminum in the jab isn't for like what the idiots like Mark Hyman and Joe Mercola tell you. The reason why is because it hid the DNA plasmids in there. It caused them to agglutinate together. And what happened? That reduced the amount of DNA plasmids that were discoverable by the FDA. So the FDA changed the rules and regulations to make sure that this vaccine got through. So anybody who took the Gardasil vaccine, I got some bad news for you. The same risks are attenuated that are present in the COVID. You're going to have intercalation. It's guaranteed. And people don't understand how this is going. Well, that's one atom we talked about. Atomic number 13. We got 55 others in this one. So what does that tell you? That there's a lot of other things that they can use this for. Okay? And do I have my own ideas about what those plans are going to be? Yes. But remember, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm not going to tell you what I think they are until I have the smoking gun. When it turns out with COVID, Kevin McKiernan gave me my smoking gun. So that's why I feel emboldened to talk to guys like you about it, because I know that I'm firmly on terra firma.
My next question was going to ask you, where do you think this is going, based on even assumption or a guess?
I think it's going where Bill Gates and his dad wanted to go. Remember, he's a eugenicist. So it makes way more sense to reduce global population over a period of time, because guess what? When you run a one world government, what do we know about the Middle Ages for those 500 years? It's far easier to control a small number of people when you have them in indentured servitude. And that's exactly what I see the next probably 50 generations of humans if their plan comes to fruition.
You were talking about transhumanism as well, and you went deeper down it. That again, something that I didn't realize, tying it into Springfield, Ohio.
Correct, and I mean, you have to realize what Danny's idea of transhumanism is, I think, pretty warped. But I think it's warped by the propaganda that is out there. Transhumanism basically is that somehow synthetic biology and alien uses of the electromagnetic spectrum can make something more human than us. In other words, the technology can give you something better. Where is that idea buried? It's buried in guys like Ray Kurzweil. Ray Kurzweil, as far as I'm concerned, is just like the criminals that are out there. AI, anything that centralizes is contrary to Uncle Jack's thesis. I don't want anything centralized. I want everything decentralized. That's why I teach people decentralized health and why I teach people about decentralized money. And I believe when you decentralize, I live in a decentralized country. I can't get behind any person who's centralized in their thinking, and I can't get behind any technology that's centralized at its core. And unfortunately, that's why I'm out on many of the things that a lot of other people seem to be in on. You may think that's conspiratorial. I don't, because I understand fully how centralization got us in trouble, probably from 1917 onward. I mean, that's really what the Federal Reserve is all about in 1913. It's what Woodrow Wilson warned us about. After he allowed them to do what they did, he actually said it was the biggest mistake he ever did, because he centralized the central bank like all the other central banks in Europe that were already controlled by the Rothschild family. And that goes back to, Nathan Rothschild when he took control after the Battle of Waterloo. That's actually how the Rothschild family captured the royal family. The royal family was broke at that time. But guess what? Nathan Rothschild came in and bought all the bonds because no one knew about what the events of the Battle of Waterloo were for 24 hours. So he sold all of the Bank of England's debt at huge losses, and then he bought it all back for himself. That's how it went down, my friend. And guess what? Meyer Lansky knew all of this history. He knew exactly how they gained control. So if you don't think that Meyer Lansky, the reason I have a reverence for this guy, number one, as a Bitcoiner, I'll probably lay that out maybe after the election. I've already done it on my own forum. I'm doing a Q&A on that topic next Saturday. But I love anybody who is as ballsy as this guy as a criminal to take down the biggest criminal element in probably the last 300 years, which are the Bilderbergs and the families in Europe, the banking families, where he could come in as a Russian Jewish immigrant from Ukraine and figure out a way to take them down at their own game. Bro, I love this. And then he does it again to the industrial military complex in 1969 to 1973. And now, what he's done for us, we the people, you'll be very surprised how the story with Meyer Lansky, SV40, and Bitcoin end. Because I think eventually that story, when it comes out, it's going to shock people. And this is the reason why I respect a guy like Bukele. Bukele made Bitcoin legal tender before he went after the gangs. So what am I warning you? And I'm giving you a preview of what I think is going to happen in the United States. You got to make Bitcoin legal tender before you clean anything else up. And Bukele's plan was brilliant. And it also shows you that when you give people freedom and money back, that tells you the people know your intent. They know the intent of your leader. No politician gives freedom back to people and money. In fact, they do everything the opposite way. They take it away. In Bitcoin terms, we always talk to people and say, if you fix the money, you fix the world. Many people who are not associated with Bitcoin don't understand this mindset, but I'm going to tell you that it's absolutely accurate. But in the United States, since we are the global reserve currency, not only do we have to have Bitcoin, but we actually have to take apart the people that killed JFK. We will not heal as a country until that wrong is right. And we put the people in jail who not only were responsible for it, who still are alive through subsequent generations. Some of those people need to go to jail. That's Clinton, his wife, Barry, Obama, the Bushes, almost every Secretary of State, Zelensky, because he's a useful idiot. So many people in Congress. I can't even tell you. But the bottom line is, do I think we have a chance to do that now that this story is out, now that people can listen, to all the podcasts I've done? When you realize, I told Chantel this earlier today, because another Bitcoin guy wants to interview me. That's Robert Breedlove. You need to understand, Rick and me and you were sitting down was the first shot fired. That's 18 months ago. Every single podcast I've done since then is about coming to the tip of this spear that I'm giving you today. I need you to understand just how dire things are. You thought it was dire before you started talking to me? No, I don't think you have any clue. I think you're still in the matrix, if you want to know the truth. That's how I feel. I feel most people are, because they can't fathom that these people are playing the longest long game. Well, they are. This game for them goes back 1,200 years. The people on the communist side of this, believe it or not, they're watching this as a sideshow. The Chinese communists and the Russian communists, they're not the people that started this. Remember, Trotsky was killed by Stalin. Stalin told FDR that the reason you got the problem that you got with killing the Romanovs all came from the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds and the royal family told Trotsky, Lenin, and Stalin to lock the Romanovs up in Siberia until World War I was over. Have you ever wondered why the Bolshevik Revolution happened in the middle of the World War I between 14 and 18? Dude, that's the reason they wanted them locked up, so that there wouldn't be a huge problem. And instead, what does Trotsky decide to do? He finds out that what the Rothschilds are up to, and he goes and kills the Romanovs. What happens there? Royal family stunned, and so are the Rothschilds. They can't believe that Trotsky did it. So how did Stalin make it right? Why don't I have a big spur in my ass for Putin? Why do I know Zelensky's dirty? Because he's a Nazi, just like the royal family and their setup. Stalin sends his hitmen to kill fucking Trotsky in 1940. In 1943 and 1944, Stalin tells FDR that. He clues in FDR what's really going on. He knew. And so did General Groves. When General Groves heard this, he's like, I cannot have Henry Wallace take over for FDR because this is going to go sideways. If you want to know the reason why General Groves picked Stalin to be his enemy during the Cold War, it's because of what Stalin told FDR. He told him the truth.
We don't like the truth anymore, right, Dr. Kruse? That's a bad thing.
Well, I think the guys that we've been talking about for the last hour and a half, that's the industrial military complex. They're trying to whitewash it. You want to know what the real purpose of AI is? All the things that happened to you as a young man growing up. Why don't you know all the stuff that Uncle Jack knows? Because it wasn't in your history books, was it?
Nope.
So that's Edward Bernays 101. Well, guess what's happening now? OpenAI will be used to wash the internet of all their sins. You won't even know that COVID killed millions of people, probably within 10 or 15 years, if things go wrong for we the people. That's the truth. You'll only know what they want you to know. And as Klaus Schwab famously said, you'll own nothing and like it. That's the world that you're sailing into as you watch the Cleveland Browns continue to suck, drink your coffee, and watch Netflix and go to strip shows.
And keep those kids in front of those iPads.
Exactly. That's the reason why schools have no books anymore. Dude, sending your kids to public school is equivalent to, seriously, giving a child abuser your child and thinking it's okay. It's the most ridiculous thing ever. And then what do? You can't go to public school unless you get them vaccinated. Do you not see how this whole program fits together? I mean, it's fucking psychotic. And then they're radiating with Wi-Fi. They took all the books away. Dude, everybody's obedient idiots. That's how you get a democracy before you take the Constitution apart. I mean, you want to know what happened in Portland? You want to know what happened in D.C. when Trump was president? What happened in Charlottesville? What George Floyd's all about? Dude, that's what it. That's what it's all about. Everything makes sense. Just as I told Danny, I'm telling you, all the pieces fit when you know how they fell apart. You got to know your history.
Can I share a story with you about my hometown, which the school system recently passed?
Sure.
I want to get your reaction to this. I grew up in a town called Strongsville, Ohio, right outside of Cleveland. The school system passed the ability to drug test kids as young as 6th grade to seniors. And their justification for it was due to extracurricular activities and driving to school. I saw no parents upset about this at all. 6th grade.
Why would you? They're all been irradiated since Obama got rid of incandescent bulbs and he put LCD screens in front of everybody. And remember that lesson I taught you. I don't think you realize how brilliant this plan is. That started in 2009, full on. Like what Mo Dalitz did to the people in Bugsy Siegel's casino that got taken away from him because he didn't make enough money. Dalitz went pedal to the metal, dude. You're seeing history repeat. You don't even realize it. And what did Dalitz do? This is the irony. This is the only place that food plays a role. First thing he does after he blocks the light, he gives people free buffets. And why did he do that? Because he just asked people. He goes, why do you guys leave? Why do we make less money at night? They said, well, we have no place to eat. That's when you got all you can eat buffets under blue light. And it made them more compliant. Then he added the booze to it. The booze was easy because Meyer Lansky already had the connection with the Bronfans. And then where did the nakedness come in? I already told you. Lansky was running a pedophile ring. He goes, let's put young, sexy men and women all around these people. Let's do the same thing that we're doing to J. Edgar Hoover to the people in Las Vegas. And magically, guess what happened? The money came out the woodwork. Dude, it's there. You need to see it. And no, it doesn't surprise me. See, you're talking to the one guy on your podcast that no, it doesn't surprise me at all. Why? Because I made the diagnosis 30 years ago and I've had to shut my pie hole for a long time. I'm telling you, everybody's involved in this. The AMA, my specialty board, everybody. There's nobody who's not. But the people have been lied to. And it's time that somebody tell them the truth. Because you know what the big criticism that I take to heart when I'm on Twitter? People will say, well, doctors don't tell us the truth. In fact, Mary Bowden said it best on the Twitter X Spaces. She said, you know why this happens? Doctors are compliant because they have to be compliant to get into medical school. They have to follow the rules and regulations because if they don't, they get slapped by the AMA. They get slapped by the medical practice acts in their states. They get slapped by the medical staff bylaws in their hospital. She's absolutely right. But the thing is, when you understand the story about sabots are wooden shoes the Dutch used to wear to throw in the gears. Dude, I'm the dude that's been throwing the gear, the wooden shoes in the gears of this whole fucking plan. It's the reason why I hate food gurus. I know what they represent. They represent more propaganda to keep you from the truth. Okay? There's a reason that your kids have Pop-Tarts and screens in front of them. It's the same program that Meyer Lansky and Mo Dalitz brought to Las Vegas in the 1950s.
Blow me away with that.
I'm just trying to tell you that it's there, my friend. And I know it's a tough swallow, but as I've told everybody else who's interviewed me, do not trust Uncle Jack. Verify. Anybody who's a Bitcoiner is going to tell you the same thing. And I'm telling you the same thing. You have that American flag behind you. I'm going to tell you, I would never have an American flag behind me. Okay? I love my country, but I hate my government. Hate it. I hate it more than I hated King George in 1774 because I know what they are. And they are more evil. They've killed more people than anybody else in the last 150 years. And they deserve no quarter.
Do you think people would willingly comply again as they did with COVID?
55% that's out there that's still thinking. I mean, look, we are still giving children the COVID jab and people are still taking it. People are still listening to Fauci and Peter Hotez. If that doesn't scare the fuck out of you, I don't know what does. I mean, just think about where you live. I mean, we now know based on zip codes where people took the jab. They already know who's invaded. They already have the replacements ready to go. It's the places that didn't comply that they're kind of concerned about. And they've got a plan for you too. Trust me, if you think they're done, they've got all different kinds of ways that are coming to a state government near you, a local municipality near you. If you want to know why there's military guys in the hotels of New York City right now being protected from Honduras, from Venezuela, from China, from India, I can tell you why. Because they're the fucking criminals. The guardians of the gate are already inside. You guys are just waking up to it. Like, I gotta be honest with you, I find it offensive that you have an American flag behind you. Now you understand why. I don't think you're a bad guy, but it tells me you're still part of the matrix.
You want me to move the camera for the rest of the conversation?
No, I'm just trying to make the point to you. And just so you know, I'm not being hard on you. I told the story to my own members. On July 4th, 2020 is the first time for my people who pay me when I invited them all over to break all the laws in Louisiana. I had 100 of them over. And I told them, how shall we say, this story watered down. And I told them that the answer for all of them is to start transferring their assets into Bitcoin. Out of the 100, only 9 listened to me. Those 9 are now multimillionaires. The other 90 are still shell-shocked. And who did I have at this meeting, just so you know? The only person still alive from the JFK assassination, Judith Very Baker. And I told Judith, I need one bit of proof from you to know that you're not full of shit. I said, I need to see the Riley payment receipts of you and Lee Harvey Oswald, the real ones. Make sure you bring them. Well, she trumped me on that. Not only did she bring the real ones, she brought everything else she had, and I got to go through her whole box and see everything. That's when I realized she wasn't full of shit. She had stuff that no way you could have if she didn't know this. Now, she didn't know all the story about Oshner and me and the neurosurgery and the Linac, and I wasn't about to tell her because I hope she lives out the rest of her days. But she's about the only person in the JFK thing that's been telling all of you the truth, and you keep fucking mocking her and laughing at her. This lady is a true patriot. She's been carrying this torch for Lee Harvey Oswald and the truth literally since November 22nd, 1963. So, my friend, if you want to know how serious I am about this, I brought that lady to my house to meet my clients. So they knew how serious I was about this. And what did I tell them? You'll find no American flag at my house this 4th of July. In fact, you're gonna hear stories of why I feel the way I do. And yes, the people who do comply, I look at them just like you would look at probably an invading force from France or from Russia. They are our enemies. People who are U.S. citizens who complied are our enemies. The people who vote the wrong way, my friend, I'm taking all of this off. They are our enemies. And you need to begin to act like it. Every time you buy Bitcoin, you are taking power away from the industrial military complex. You're also enslaving our enemies, and I like that. They're going to have fun working on the plantation for the next 50 generations. And you know what? They deserve it. In fact, the deaths that they may get from the COVID jab may be too lenient a sentence for some of those people. How's that for a flavor you didn't expect to hear from a doctor? That's how I feel about people. I said to Danny, and I'm saying it to you, I feel like Paul Revere. And now I'm lighting the fires everywhere, my friend. I lit more fires with you than I lit with Danny. Why? Because it's that important. We are 19 days away, bro. My hope for you, don't even edit this. Just get it out as fast as you can and let people do what they will. Let them say what they will. Let them feed back to you, because guess what? It's a conversation everybody needs to have at the dinner table for the next 2 weeks.
And even then, you said something at the very beginning of all this, why people aren't more mad at what's going on. And another thing you touched on, in previous conversations with the whole, with the Roth IRA, and how this whole financial system is one big fugazi. And I've tried to share with people, not that I'm an expert by any stretch, but those pensions that you've been working towards, I don't think they're there now.
I'm going to tell, we didn't get into this with Danny, and I didn't get into it with you, but I'm going to tell you where the link of that comes in, just so people, if they want to fact check it, can. There was a lot of comments before YouTube banned me from talking in there about and they were from registered financial associates, about the Roths and the SEPs and all that. Said, no, he's lying to you. It's not true. What you don't know is in the Octopus murders, one of the links is that Meyer Lansky got access to the IRS computer in Martinsburg, Virginia, West Virginia. Just so you know that. So guess what? That money is gone. You just don't know it yet. And guess what? That Promise software that you'll learn about in there, that was part of this whole story. And when you find out the people that are linked to this, you'll be stunned. Meyer Lansky was telling people, oh, I got you. I got you again, Rothschilds. Just so you know that. People don't know what they don't know until they know it. But I'm telling you right now, you don't have the money you think you have. Your government doesn't have the money you think it has. They know that the money is flawed, and they're getting ready to get rid of the money. They're going to confiscate it all and turn it into a CBDC that's programmable. And the irony is Meyer Lansky gave him that solution. Meyer Lansky's got a better one, though. He's got one for the savages. And that's what you need to know. When you look into truly what Octopus was all about, you'll see, right? The reason why all these people died, Danny Casolaro, the poor Indian guy that was on the reservation that they killed. There was a triple murder that happened in the Indian reservation that Dr. Nichols took over, who was a CIA asset. These people were killed for their land. They were killed because this is where the private bank of the industrial military complex and all these billionaires that are linked to Israel and the United States, the Howard Hugheses, the Bronfmans, the people tied to the crime families. All their money is running through all of these things. That's how you got, the connection between the Colombian drug cartel and Mena, Arkansas. If you want to know who was running that, John Gotti was part of that. Everybody knows that now. But you don't know how it was set up. And it was set up in the 70s and the 80s. Your government is the biggest fucking drug dealer in the world. They want you to blame the Sacklers? No, it's fucking them. Sacklers are just their front. That's all it is. They are evil. They've addicted us all. They did the same thing Meyer Lansky did in Vegas. Well, let's give them booze to lower their dopamine so we can get their money more. That's exactly what the people who are trying to take over your government are doing. They're making you drug addicts because you're easier to control. They make you sicker because you're easier to control. The story is the same. You just don't know it. You can't even fathom the level of depravity of these people. Well, I would tell you, just go look at the preamble and the rules and regulations of the UN Charter and tell me you don't see it right there. You probably never thought Gaddafi was a patriot, but he was. Probably never looked at Putin the way I look at him. Even the guys in China, the BRICS countries are afraid to use Bitcoin. Do you want to know why? Because they know that guys like Meyer Lansky were involved in its creation. How do you like that? That's why they want to go back to silver and gold. But they haven't done a good deep dive on that, my friend. And I think with that, we're probably going to have to end because I got to go.
One last question real quick. Somebody asked me to ask you about red lights, and what do you recommend if somebody's behind a cubicle all day?
Well, I always recommend the sun. Like if you sit next to a window, open the window up. That's the best answer. If you can't open the window and you've got to use a red light, they have small little 1x1 bulbs. A lot of companies sell it. You just have to make sure that it doesn't have high flicker and it's got decent light. The way you do that is you test it with a flicker meter and use a spectroscope. So what I like is lights that have 600 to 1,000 nanometer light. Those are the things that offset the blue. Obviously, wear blue blocking glasses. The glasses that I recommend are Lucia Eyes, LuciaEyes.com. And then get Iris software on your computer. If the company you work for won't let you use the Iris software or Flux, buy a piece of plastic that you can get from Acme Plastics. Believe it or not, it's a place, I think, in Ohio that sells blue blocking plastics. They'll make a lip over it. And you can hang it right over your computer. You can do the same thing to your TV. That's what we do.
Where can people find you?
Dr. Jack Kruse everywhere. Every place on social media. I got a book on Amazon. I've got a Patreon that goes into all the science that's based on MK Ultra and the Brain Health Initiative. On Twitter, I'm Dr. Jack Kruse, but that's everywhere. There's a lot of fake Dr. Jack Kruse accounts that are trying to get in on some of the stuff I'm doing now. But I also have a website that has a forum. It would take you probably 15 years to go read all this. Most of the information that I shared with you today can be found on my forums. You'll be able to go under the Kruse Longevity tab, and you'll see how General Groves was formed, how Israel, the Mossad, and the popes were linked into this, with details, dates, times, references, sites. Everything's there. It's there for you to look at. It's there for you to prove me wrong. I'm waiting for one of you to prove me wrong. I'm waiting. I enjoy it. But then, when you find out that I might not be lying to you, then you have a duty to me. Go light up a savage. Go light up a patriot, and let's take our country back.
Dr. Jack, thank you so much for doing this, and appreciate all the time, and love to have you back, and look forward to continuing to follow your work and hearing other interviews.
No problem. Anytime, my friend. Take care.
Mic drop.